In a village where the red earth meets the golden horizon, there lived a girl named Zola. She was a quiet soul, the only child of humble farmers who spent their days tending to ridges of yam and cassava. Zola never sought to be noticed, but her beauty was like a sunrise. It was impossible to ignore. The elders called her the heaven's reflection, a title she wore like a heavy crown she never asked for. Zola's father was a man of few words, believing that peace was found in silence. Her mother, Nara, was the heartbeat of their home, a woman whose laughter could soften the hardest day. They lived a simple life, but it was a life shadowed by the whispers of others. You see, in that small village, Zola's radiance didn't inspire everyone. To some, her light was a mirror that showed them their own darkness. 3 girls, Kira, Elin, and Mara, always moved together like a pack of hunting lionesses. They watched Zola from the village square, their giggles hiding teeth, and their smiles masking a deep-rooted envy. "Look at her," Kira would hiss as Zola walked toward the stream. "She carries her water pot as if it were a queen's orb. Does she think the prince will come to our dusty paths just for her?" Zola would lower her gaze, trying to shrink into herself, but the world wouldn't let her. She didn't realize then that envy wears the softest silks and speaks in the sweetest tones before it strikes. For days, the air around Zola's home was filled with the scent of peace offerings. Kira, Elin, and Mara became permanent fixtures under the shade of the mango trees. They brought more than just groundnuts. They brought a false sense of belonging. They spoke in hushed, rhythmic tones, praising Zola's heavenly dance steps and even asking for her advice on their own rappers. It was a masterclass in deception. To Zola, it felt like the thorns had finally dropped from the roses. But beneath the surface, the sweetness was a distraction. While one girl distracted Zola with stories of the prince's kindness, the others were deep in the thicket, sweating as they struck the earth with hoes and shovels. Their hatred wasn't a sudden flame. It was a slow-burning coal that fueled their strength as they dug a tomb for Zola's dreams. When they finally finished the pit, they didn't see a hole in the ground. They saw a throne room for their own vanity. They returned to Zola with dirt under their fingernails and smiles that didn't reach their eyes, inviting her on the shortcut that would change everything. The morning of the great royal dance arrived, a day that promised joy for many but brought a chilling premonition to Nara. Her dread had peaked. Nara had been haunted by a recurring vision, a beautiful flower being choked by silent, colorful vines. She pulled Zola aside, her voice low and urgent. "Do not follow them into the shadows, my daughter. Go to the palace alone. My dreams have turned to ash, and I fear for your light." Zola, her heart a tangled mix of hope and unease, promised. But when Kira, Elin, and Mara arrived, dressed in their finest silks, chirping about a secret shortcut through the thicket to keep their ceremonial clothes pristine, Zola's resolve crumbled. Her longing for acceptance, for true friendship, overpowered her mother's warning. She wanted to believe people could change. They walked deep into the bush, where the usual chatter of birds had died into an eerie silence. The path grew narrow, the forest closing in around them like a hungry maw. "Just a bit further, Zola," Kira urged, her smile too wide, pointing toward a path covered in dry palms. One step, that was all it took. The earth vanished beneath Zola. A visceral scream tore through the quiet forest as she plummeted into a jagged pit, her body slamming into the cold, damp floor. Above her, the friends didn't gasp in horror. They leaned over the edge, their faces twisting into the cruel masks they had hidden for weeks. "Dance now, heaven's reflection," Elin mocked, her voice echoing in the hole. "Let's see if the prince can find his bride at the bottom of a grave." They turned and walked away, their laughter echoing through the trees, leaving Zola in a darkness so thick she could almost taste it. She cried until her throat was raw, clawing at the rough walls, but the pit was too deep. As the sun began its descent, painting the sky with fiery hues, Zola shivered, broken and alone, understanding the depth of their betrayal. She was truly trapped. At the palace, the festivities swelled, but Nara's heart remained heavy. Zola had not arrived. Her frantic questions to Kira, Elin, and Mara were met with feigned ignorance and innocent shrugs. As the prince danced with other maidens, his eyes held no spark of recognition, no hint of a chosen bride. Nara found her husband, a quiet man whose silence now broke with shared fear. Something was terribly wrong. Meanwhile, the prince confided in his father, the king. "My heart remains untouched, father. My bride is not among them." The king, a man of stern but just rule, halted the music. The crowd gasped. The disappointed trio exchanged furious glances, their elaborate plans for Zola's humiliation having ironically led to their own failure. Nara and her husband rushed to the king, their voices trembling as they reported Zola's disappearance, detailing the trio's invitation. The king, his face clouding with concern, summoned Kira, Elin, and Mara. They stood before him, clinging to their lies, claiming no knowledge of Zola's whereabouts. Despite his guards' initial search yielding nothing, the king vowed to continue at first light. Nara spent the night weeping, clutching her husband's hand, praying to the ancestors for her daughter's return. As the dawn broke, a skilled hunter named Dinta ventured into the deepest parts of the bush, his senses keenly attuned to the whispers of the forest. He was on his daily quest for game, but today a different sound caught his ear, a faint, desperate plea. "Please, anyone, help me!" Dinta, puzzled by a human voice in such a remote place, followed the cries. He found Zola, weak and trembling, at the bottom of a deep, concealed pit. With practiced skill, Dinta lowered a rope and pulled her from the darkness. He gave her water, listening with growing horror as Zola recounted the betrayal. Instead of heading straight to the village, Dinta's heart led him to the palace. When Dinta presented Zola, covered in dirt and barely standing, to the king and her relieved parents, the palace fell silent. Zola, supported by her mother, bravely recounted her ordeal. The king's face turned to thunder. He summoned the entire village. Before the assembled crowd, the king called forth Kira, Elin, and Mara. Their earlier denials crumbled under his piercing gaze. One girl, trembling, confessed their jealousy, their twisted desire to teach Zola a lesson, admitting they had pushed her into the pit. The others, tears streaming down their faces, begged for mercy. But the king's decision was final. "Take them," he commanded his guards, his voice like cold steel. "Lock them away for a long season, and when they return, let no one in this village speak to them, sell to them, or buy from them. Anyone who defies this decree shall face the same punishment." A hush fell over the crowd. Then the prince stepped forward. He walked directly to Zola, gently brushed the dust from her ceremonial dress, and lifted her to her feet. His eyes, now filled with a warmth they had lacked all night, met hers. "I have found my wife," he declared, his voice ringing through the palace. "She stands before you today." The crowd erupted in cheers, their joy a stark contrast to the despair of Kira, Elin, and Mara, who were led away, sobbing and pleading for a mercy they had denied another. Dinta, the noble hunter, was richly rewarded by the king. And so Zola, the heaven's reflection, found her destiny. Her light, though dimmed by shadows for a time, ultimately shone brighter, proving that true beauty cannot be buried by envy, nor can a mother's deepest fears be ignored.